What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the office on a dreary October day. Want to just thank everybody for your patience while I get these things done. Patience if you're a customer waiting for parts, pieces, or restoration to be completed. Not forgotten about. Calling every day wanting to know what's going on doesn't help, but I understand your need to know for communication. So, working every day. I appreciate everybody that follows along, all the social media attention. Just a reminder to everyone that we are not taking on new work. I appreciate the referrals, but we are not doing anything new now. Every job that we do is ones that have already been here. They were calendared, scheduled, prepaid, whatever. They are being worked through, and then that is it. We will transition to 100% part sales and personal builds. And actually, I'm probably late to the game, but I'm going to ramp up the social media. Because if I'm not building customer trucks, I will have time to do better quality YouTube videos, more informative builds and instruction. And it'll just be me and Josie and Ty, and we're just going to let the part sales carry the business. And then hopefully the YouTube revenue will increase. Because I do, believe it or not, I do make money from social media. You know, I'm not getting rich on it by any means, but it covers a few of the bills now and then. So I'm going to keep going that way because, the only thing the most important thing, I shouldn't say the only thing, the most important thing that I have to offer the world right now is just my knowledge in this stuff. You guys are dying. Sorry. Awful. These old guys are dying faster and faster every day, and I'm trying to learn as much as I can from them, and I have learned a lot from them. Several of them have passed away, and I don't want this stuff to die with me. I don't have kids. I don't have any kids that are close to me, so the only kids I got are the young people that listen to these podcasts and social media stuff. So I want to make sure I get it out there to the world before I die. And then, that way it can live on in the digital world forever. And it won't die with me like so many of the old timers of the past. So anyway, I appreciate everybody following along. I thank you for your donations on Patreon, the Instagram subscriptions, guys that just send me money. I appreciate it very much. It all helps. So, if you listen to the podcast about traveling, I mentioned some stuff about gearing and road speed. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, is the relationship between horsepower and gearing and going down the road comfortably. There seems to be, looking at the internet, a disconnect in people's minds between horsepower and road speed. I saw a guy post the other day. He was like, I think my truck is broken because when I was towing up this hill, I kept pushing the gas pedal farther and farther down until I was at full throttle, but I could only go 25 miles an hour. And I'm like, that's called owning an old truck. You have reached the limit of its horsepower output, and that's the result that you get. But gearing would help. Gearing makes use of your limited horsepower. You look at the old days, these guys in their, KB over the road trucks with their 6-cylinder gassers, 500 cubic inch 6-cylinder that gets 4 miles to the gallon and makes 180 horsepower is still moving, 40,000 pounds down the road, but they do it, at 30 miles an hour. But it's because they had, 10 speed, 13 speed transmissions, or, the double, you'd have 2 5 speeds, or, a 5 and a 3 with a 2-speed rear end or something. I mean, there were so many gear combinations out there. It's so complicated. And, if you're not a professional truck driver that has experience with those sorts of things, like it's impossible for the lay person to wrap their head around just how hard it is to drive an old truck like that pulls a lot of weight. So, over the years, they developed different ways of getting power down, and they figured out, the gear ratios that are best suited for engine output and to get you down the road. So, the thing, like, I've got an overdrive 5-speed in the green Travelette. Gear ratios in it are essentially the same as a T98 4-speed, and then it has the 5th gear, which is overdrive. So you have to imagine that gears are just levers, and the taller the gear, meaning the lower the ratio, like, overdrive is 0.8 to 1, the harder it is to turn. I don't know how to describe it. Like, try closing a door at the hinge. Use your fingertips on the molding and try to close a door just using the leverage of your fingertips. And it's very difficult, if not impossible. But if you grab the door at the handle and swing it, it's very easy. So that analogy is like, if you grab it by the handle, that's like 1st gear. And if you grab it by the hinge, that's like 5th gear. And so the more places you have to grab from the door handle down to the hinge is like having more gears. And so, it's easier to shut that door from the hinge if it's already moving, if that makes sense. So, imagine your door having 5 knobs on it from the outside to the inside. And as you move the speed of the door, you move down the doorknobs till you get to the one that's closest to the hinge, and you can pull it shut the rest of the way. So when you put an overdrive on a truck that doesn't have a lot of horsepower, or is heavy, or has terrible wind resistance, it's not going to have the power to pull it down the road. So I get a lot of guys that call and they're like, I've got a C series that's, 4-wheel drive, mostly stock, 304 that's kind of tired, but I want to go faster down the road. So I want a T34. And I know from my experience that unless you have the horsepower to turn that 5th gear, you will get worse mileage and you won't be able to maintain that gear. That happens to me in my green truck now. That Travelette weighs 7,000 pounds. And it's lifted, and it's a brick, and, it's got a lot going against it. So I can't use overdrive in that truck with the 345 when I'm towing around here at higher elevations. It does work on the flats, like in sea level in California. It does move the truck, but any kind of grade or any headwind, and I'm back in 4th gear. So guys don't realize that it takes horsepower to turn that gear. Now, the caveat to that is you move further down the gear train. You look at your rear end and you look at your tire size. So the way to think about it is like, I don't know, how do I say this? So 30-inch tall tires and 354 gears is pretty close to 31-inch tall tires and 373 gears, which is also the same or very close to 32-inch tall tires and 410 gears. And then it's 456 gears and 33-inch tires. And then it's 488 gears and 35-inch tires. And so on and so forth. And there are some ratios in between there that they don't make anymore, like 392 gear ratio. And I think there's a 478 gear ratio. And then the two-wheel drive internationals with the RA15s, you had a 430 gear ratio, which there was no Dana Spicer equivalent to the 430. So, but anyway, so if you remember those ratios, but if you have 354 gears and you run 33-inch tall tires, you're adding more leverage. You've moved down the doorknobs again, and you're trying to shut your door from the middle instead of out at the end where it was easy. So if you compound that stress of, 354s and 33s with the stress of an overdrive or not being geared right at the transmission, you don't have the horsepower to turn it. The gears are just a torque multiplier. The more gear ratio you have, the more it multiplies the torque. So that's why 152 powered Scout 80s with 3 speeds had 488s or 427s. It wasn't until the 800s, I believe, that the optional 410, and then with the V8 introduction, you had 373s and even 354s, believe it or not. You could get a 354 and an 800. Very optional. I've only heard of 1 or 2 of them in my whole life. But anyway, when you have low horsepower, you need deeper gears. Or if you're moving a lot of weight, my medium duty S1600 out there, its high gear is like 589. It has a 6.9 IDI and a 5-speed direct with a 2-speed rear end. It's slower than hell, but it moves stuff down the road. It's slow. So that's what I'm getting at, is that you need to account for tire size, axle gear, and horsepower or torque when you're choosing what you're trying to do. Like, honestly, the green truck would probably be better with 488s and 35s. I could pull that overdrive easier, but the how do I say this? The trade-off is that now I'm back up at 3,000 RPM to do 70 miles an hour. So then what was the point of going to 488s if I'm still getting terrible gas mileage because I have to run at 3,000 RPM? So, that's the thing you have to weigh. So for me, running 456s and 35s, I can do 65 in 4th gear with, good power. And when I'm empty, I can do the overdrive. But when I'm towing, I stay in that 4th gear, and I get 9.5 to 10 miles to the gallon around here while I'm towing. I don't do a lot of towing because I have the black truck with the diesel, and it gets 11 miles to the gallon when I'm loaded at 28,000 pounds. So that's a whole different animal. But that's that horsepower versus torque multiplier setup. So if you had a 392 that was tuned well with a 4-barrel and whatnot, you would have a better chance of turning taller gears because you just have the horsepower and the torque to turn it. So it's a terrible math problem, and you really have to be committed to your setup. Like, you see it all the time where guys are just like, I just want to run 33s and not change anything else. Well, then 4 months later, they're complaining about, lack of power. Their automatic transmission is slipping. They're too fast off road. They're uncontrollable. So, you have to kind of account for, if you're going to do a tire change, you really should do a gear change. Or if you want to go down the road with an overdrive, you may consider a gear change to help use the tire size a little better, or more horsepower. If you're running a carburetor with points and stock exhaust and you want to run an overdrive, you may want to consider fuel injection with electronic ignition and a nice dual exhaust system. That, and then you'll pick up 10 or 12 horsepower, and that might be the difference in being able to use that overdrive. But many times, and it just, the other factor to consider is weight. A Scout 800 with a V8 weighs like 4,500 pounds. You can pull that overdrive. A 304 and 410 gears with an NV 4500 will pull that no problem, and you'll get 16 miles to the gallon. But a 72 1310 that's Travelette, that's loaded all the time, that weighs 7,000 pounds, you're going to need more horsepower to turn those gears, or deeper gears to use the horsepower you have. So you really have to sit down and figure out that math problem. What do you want to do? How fast do you want to go? How much does your rig weigh? How much towing are you going to do? And, change your gearing accordingly. So I get back to what I was saying. If I was going to tow all the time with the green truck and make no changes whatsoever, I should go to 488s. That would be the smart thing to do. But the other thing I could consider doing is going down from 35s to 33s. So that would be essentially like changing to 488s. But then the truck might look a little funny with the smaller tires, and then that comes down to your ego and your taste. I probably won't be going down to 33s, but I also don't tow that much. I do tow a little bit, and I just live with not being able to use the overdrive and maybe getting a little worse mileage, because I like the way the truck looks, and I like the way that it drives empty, and I like how it handles empty. So that's the way it is. But, I'm gonna, if I was towing all the time, or the other way too, is if you're building a Scout and you want to go crawling a lot, it's your camping, it's your off-road rig, it's an adventure truck that, you maybe drive it several states at a time, and then you're off-road for a week or something, you're going to want to gear a little deeper. If on paper you need 410 gears, I would consider 456s. A little bit better off-road, a little bit whatever. Or you go the other way, you go with 410s, and then you run a transmission that has the overdrive that you need, and the low first gear, or a compound low transfer case setup. Run your 410s and then put low gears in a Dana 300 or the 315s and a Dana 20 or something like that. And then, go that route. So there is some room for wiggle depending on your application to consider. There is no magic. There's no magic bullet. You can get close if you spend a lot of money. Like, you want to have a good highway driver that then also has great low range off-road. Well, then you're going to be in that, NV 4500 with a 4-to-1 Dana 300 and 373 axle gears with 33-inch tires, or 410 axle gears with 33-inch tires. Then you're going to have highway speed and you'll have crawl gear for what you're doing. You won't be able to tow as well, because I think you're going to run out of HPs in there, but, that gets you a lot closer. So, there's so many variables. For example, my red truck has 373 axle gears and like 32.5-inch tall tires. We are swapping in a 345 and a T35 direct drive 5-speed. So now the fifth gear is 1-to-1, but my highway speed comes from the 373 axle gears. So I still have more doorknobs from my out to in, but my final gear is not as close to the hinge as it would be with an overdrive. But then the axle gear is what takes that highway speed. So I'm actually kind of excited to try that out. So yes, there's all kinds of ways to skin a cat and a whole bunch of ways to get there. It's just, you got to do the math, consider your options, consider your budget, because it gets expensive fast. Figure out what size tire you're going to be married to, and then go from there. So don't just think that you can put an overdrive on something and magically pick up 10 miles an hour and 4 miles to the gallon. And same for the axles. Don't think that you can just bolt on 33-inch tires and nothing's going to change, or 35-inch tires. Really, and there's a reason why, if you paid attention to any of the new trucks, new manufacturers, like a lot of these trucks that are coming out now have 427s, 430s, 456s, because they have 10-speed automatic transmissions. So they've got 10 doorknobs to pull that door shut. So they can make use of that low axle gear. And then they have, 3 overdrives to get you going down the road. Because the other thing too is new trucks have like 500 horsepower and they can move a lot of gear. So, they can have low axle gears and 3 overdrives. The Allison 1000s, the 6 speeds and the Duramaxes, those have 2 overdrives. And those trucks had 410 gears. Excuse me. They had 410 gears a lot of times, and the double over still gave them good highway speed because they had the horsepower to turn it. So again, double check your math, think about what you want to do, and then you really got to commit to it, because it's going to make for the best possible driver. So anyway, hopefully that made sense. My rambling, my own incoherent drone. If you have any questions, you can always email me, message me on social media, and I'll try to help you out. But anyways, I appreciate everybody. I love you all very much. Thank you for listening. Thanks for following along. And until next time, I'm Dan from Binder Boneyard.